Welcome to the presentation Rebooting Your Civilian Self. This has been produced by CalTAP and presented by Swords to Plowshares. We're going to be talking about Battle Mind to Civilian Mind. We're going to be talking about Boot Camp in Reverse and the military-civilian divide. Starting off with an introduction, it's important to recognize that yes, while you may have served in the military and you're a veteran, you're now a civilian, and it doesn't necessarily feel like that. It's probably going to feel like you're a separate entity because of a lot of those cultural disconnects. But it's important to acknowledge that you're also reintegrating into the civilian world and you're becoming back a part of the civilian world, which is where you were when you left for the military. What happens next now that you're in this situation and that you're part of the civilian world again, especially after having been potentially gone for so long? We're going to explore that. Have you signed up for VA healthcare? We're going to explore this, and we're going to talk about 2 tips. Tip 1, you can start your application for VA healthcare at va.gov. Tip 2, contact your local VA's Transition and Care Management Team for OIF, OEF, and O&D veterans. They can help you enroll in VA healthcare, coordinate early assessments for service-connected disabilities to expedite compensation claims, and help initiate care. They can also get you connected to a primary care physician and keep you connected to resources and services that you've earned. When we talk about Boot Camp in Reverse, we're talking about you going out and finding your allies. Visiting a veteran service organization and staying connected to other veterans. They're the ones who could definitely point you to resources and services, especially those who've been out longer. I mean, not necessarily all of us are doing successful, and we all have varying degrees of success, but we've all had to go through our own journeys and have our own different experiences of how to navigate the civilian world since we've left. So there's quite a few of us that are able to provide some degree of advice, or at least point you in the right direction. We could talk about using your GI Bill. You should use your GI Bill. You have the benefits. Use them, and it really can't be stressed enough. I know you may not necessarily know what you want to do with your GI Bill. You don't necessarily know what you want to do in school, or you don't even know what you want to do in your path in life yet. And that's understandable. We all have different roads that we're following down. But there's been a lot of people who didn't know what they wanted to do with their benefits. And in turn, there was times where those people may have not have used their benefits in the allotted time that they have had. With the new Forever GI Bill, that does change with some of the newer, that does change with the newer veterans. But a lot of you who may not be as new or may have hit the cut, you're missing out on that. And even if you have all the time in the world, you still want to be able to jump on that GI Bill. Community college is a great thing where you can go and learn a bit more about yourself and get yourself a better understanding of what you want to pursue and what you want to do academically. And if school's not necessarily for you, maybe you could look at a trade institution instead and really get down into something that maybe you've liked, or something that you want to turn into a passion. Either way, you have these amazing benefits that a lot of other Americans don't necessarily have. Jump in and use them. Getting an education can help you find a new purpose, build a network, stay stable, and advance your career. I know for a lot of us veterans who did go through higher education and actually really enjoyed what we got out of it, and it did advance our lives, we found a lot of new friendships, we found a lot of new guidance, we found what we wanted to get involved in, what we wanted to do. And it's a great way to build new communities, especially if you end up at a school that maybe has a good student veteran population. Then you've got a community right there on the spot that you can connect with and help navigate your way through and ask what their experiences are, what they're doing, what they're navigating. It's by getting yourself involved that you can learn in the first place. It's hard to learn about something and understand where you might fit if you don't step in the water. If your immediate concern is about employment and maybe picking up a civilian job, and let's say you didn't get one on the way out, or you weren't able to find one on the way out, head over to Employment and Development Department for unemployment claims and job searching. They can help tackle a whole host of different things, and especially if you're coming off of active duty, you can go and get unemployment benefits. You're going to want to use this opportunity to try and find meaningful work. With your skill set, there's definitely an easier time for you to get jobs if you just need to cover your basic finances and need to get your affairs in order. But it's also difficult to kind of work in certain fields, especially having a career like you did in the military. You might not find as much purpose. You might feel a little bit lost, or you might kind of question why you're working in a particular field. It's important, and this is one of the more difficult things that we talk about when you're coming out of service. Unfortunately, a lot of the advice you're going to get about the civilian world is coming from people who may have not have lived in the civilian world for a long time. Resumes have changed. How people craft resumes changed. Crafting a civilian resume is definitely unique, and it's different than maybe what some of your peers experienced when they were back in the civilian world. But there are resources online, there are resources here, and there are resources at a variety of different places that are free to you to help you craft an appropriate resume that can articulate your military experience to civilian counterparts. You have to understand that what's unique about your military experience, and even if you can't necessarily communicate all of it or communicate details, is you have a set of soft skills that is completely unique to the military, that people aren't getting out of college, that people aren't getting out of high school. And that's important to employers. That's important to the very people that are looking to hire y'all. If you can utilize these skills in order to get into places that you may have not been able to give to if it was not for the sake of your military experience. It's also important to note when you're looking at different companies that you might want to consider jumping into, whether it's just, for basic work to cover the basic needs, or something that you might want to pursue a career in, is there's a lot of companies out there that have veteran-specific programs, and they're actively looking to bring veterans on board and incorporate them into their own veteran community that they have on staff and plug them in. Now, there's a lot of employers that might already have these programs, and you simply might not know about it. But these are things that you conduct in your research when you're looking at getting hired at a respective company. Another thing, and this is something that we've noticed, is a lot of veterans tend to isolate. They don't necessarily talk to other veterans. And sometimes the perception could be that the other veterans that might be out there are from a different generation, or you can't necessarily relate, or you aren't necessarily eager to go and talk to other veterans. You're kind of looking to get back into a normal life. But honestly, talking to other veterans is a great way to find your foundation and to kind of get back to normal, because they're going through something that they already kind of knocked out before you did, but it's along a similar path. There might be things that are new to you or might be weird to you that a lot of us have already experienced, and that's something that you can share and confide in, and that we can all kind of reflect on and work together in order to move forward on. When we talk about battle mind, and especially when we're talking about battle mind to civilian mind, you as a service member probably are already aware of battle mind, especially how many times we've gone through it in certain debriefings or when you're getting demobbed. A quick refresher is how battle mind was developed as a way to get a better understanding of what service members are going through. And it's a great way to reflect whether we've actually deployed overseas, or if not, it's just a natural part of being in the military. And we're going to dig into that. So for battle mind, you've trained for years. You've been a leader in some capacity, whether formal or informal. You've survived, and you've been taught how to communicate, how to protect yourself, and how to protect your peers. how to spot danger, and how to react to that danger. And it's not that you've just been trained this and taught this. It has become conditioned into who you are as a person. When we talk about the civilian mind, it's a new environment and it can seem strange and unwelcoming. People don't understand you. They don't understand necessarily why you might communicate in a certain way or why you might act in a certain way, and it can become difficult. You got to remember, though, that you've been taught to adapt to new and unfamiliar environments. And so you can use the training that you've had in the military to change your perspective about the new world around you. So we have to learn how to translate battle mind to civilian mind, and how does military behavior look in the civilian world? We got to understand the differences, and the differences are significant. When we talk about military behaviors, and we can talk about what that looks like and how that can be an impact in civilian life, is the unique relationships you develop in the military. When you come out of that, you might not be looking for brand new friends. You might not be looking for that community. You're kind of getting your affairs in order, but in turn, it can look like you're withdrawing from civilian friends or family. When we talk about accountability in the military, remember being in charge of all those sensitive items? Well, when you come back into the civilian world, that can look like being a little bit obsessive or a little bit controlling. Tactical or situational awareness can look like hypervigilance and can look a bit unnecessary. Same thing when it comes to targeted aggression. We're used to yelling at each other and telling each other like it is and being clear as hell. That can look very inappropriate to the civilian world, and we can come off as really aggressive. Even if we are not conceptualizing it as being aggressive, maybe we're even conceptualizing it as being assertive. That could be too much in the civilian world. We got to tone that down a notch. Emotional control can look like anger or detachment. They can wonder why you're not having an emotional response to something, not realizing that your ability to control your emotions as necessary is a skill set we use to survive. Same thing when we talk about mission or operational security. There's certain things we don't talk about our military experiences, and in turn people can think we're just being secretive and not necessarily wanting to deal with this. When we hyper-focus on things like mission accomplishment and being able to really chime in and focus in on things, on the civilian side, there's a lot of things that we aren't going to be able to accomplish. There are a lot of things that we aren't going to be able to achieve, and especially on our first steps, we're going to trip a lot. And when we think about that, that means that there's going to be a lot more times where we're not necessarily winning or where we're failing. And those failures can pile up, and we don't know necessarily how to respond to those. When we think about individual responsibility in the military or team responsibility in the military, where it's my responsibility to take care of those I'm with, that can look like guilt in the civilian life. Maybe somebody I was supposed to take care of died, and I had that survivor's guilt with me. Same thing when we talk about being lethally armed. If I'm feeling unsafe, if I'm feeling weird, if I'm feeling like I'm vulnerable, me having a firearm is going to make me feel safe. Out here, you can't have a firearm in quite a few places, especially if you don't have proper, let's say, concealed carry permit. And so it's like, okay, maybe that's going to trigger my anxiety a bit more that I'm unarmed, or maybe I'm going to be carrying something that I shouldn't in order to have that confidence. And those are things that we need to be able to navigate so we don't end up screwing ourselves over. Last but not least, when we talk about how we conceptualize driving within the military and we think is normal, can be seen as very defensive or aggressive driving in civilian side. I know how I drove in Afghanistan was normal on a day-to-day basis, and my first year and a half back from Afghanistan was probably the most amount of times I've been pulled over by law enforcement. And that was just very telling of my experience when it came to driving and what I was used to driving on a day-to-day basis while I was in Afghanistan. Let's talk about the military and civilian divide. You may feel that civilians don't understand you or that they don't want to understand you. And it's an important question to ask what if civilians feel like they're not going to be understood by veterans? And that's kind of funny to say, but I mean, that's something that I've definitely experienced. There's been quite a few people who, didn't necessarily come from my background and didn't serve in the military. And when I'd have conversations with them, I would end up learning that they were a bit more reserved, or that they can feel as being as personal with me or as open with me. And when it was kind of a digging about, okay, hey, like, why are you kind of like holding back on this? Or, why are they not really opening up about certain issues? They'd mention right from the get-go, they'd say that they felt it was weird because, if they're talking about problems that they had or whatever, they felt it was weird mentioning it to me because they had thought that I had gone through more stuff. And so they either felt that it was kind of like disrespectful, or like a whole bunch of different like little things that I wasn't necessarily thinking about. And so they didn't even necessarily want to open up to me because they felt like what I experienced was so vastly more challenging or difficult, and that they weren't sure that we could relate. But in turn, the military is a traumatic institution. And when you have civilian friends who've experienced trauma, there's ways to kind of bridge that gap and even be able to bond over that and talk about over that. As long as we're not playing some kind of like ego game of like, oh, I've gone through that, and dismissing their experiences, which is frankly rather rude. We got to be able to break down the barriers and open the doors to relationships and to friendships, to work, and to civilian life. I was fortunate in the sense that I did make a lot of civilian friends while I was in college. They were also a few years younger than me, but it was interesting in the sense that a lot of them saw me as a person that they could come to for advice, being a non-traditional student, especially having gone through the military. And it was cool to develop those relationships and those friendships in that manner, that people saw me as like a go-to person that they could rely on. And the same thing when it came to work. I was getting pulled into internships or stuff that would be expected of a college student, but here I was as a veteran. And so they held me to a higher degree of respect, being like, oh, I know if I tell you this, you're not going to fool around, you're going to knock it out, you're going to do this stuff. And it was that allowed me to build bridges with civilians a lot quicker, because I wanted to have what could look like a normal life and build those bonds with civilians. But also that experience allowed me to fall back on my experience and utilize that in a way where other people could benefit from that, and where they saw a value in friendship with me. We talked about battle mind, so think about battle mind. How are you at communicating? And that's something that I think a lot of veterans need to interrogate for themselves, because that's one of our biggest challenges when we come into the civilian world. I don't know how many student veterans that I've talked to that got into trouble in public presentations because of how they communicated during the course of those public presentations. Some of it could be funny in the sense, maybe they were dropping a lot of curse words and it was their first year in college in a PowerPoint presentation, and the teacher goes and docks them down a letter grade. But there's also a level of assertiveness and aggressiveness of, hey, I'm confident about what I'm talking about, even if I'm wrong, and I'm going to talk in a manner that doesn't make anybody else feel comfortable critiquing me about that or asserting about that. And so a lot of people can be off-put by being like, whoa, that person's unnecessarily intense about everything. And we got to negotiate how we communicate, and how, hey, maybe we need to tone it down a notch. Maybe we need to listen more, and really try and wrap that all in to see about how we interact with our civilian relationships versus our military relationships. Again, we can reflect with that when we talk about school, when we talk about family, when we could talk about job interview. A lot of HR professionals that I have talked to have mentioned that veterans come off as really assertive in a job interview and really high energy in a way that makes HR professionals uncomfortable. And again, I've mentioned this, where the advice that you're receiving, especially from people who've been in the military 10 plus years, these are people who have also not had a civilian job for 10 plus years. Or maybe, let's say they're National Guard, maybe they already had a career, but that's a career that they've had for a while, so they haven't had to go through job searching, and that stuff changes pretty rapidly. If you're coming in being like, I'm going to be assertive, I'm going to win them over, I'm going to do all this other stuff, in a lot of ways, that mentality can completely turn off a person from hiring you, being like, okay, this person came in and, you know, maybe they don't sound confident, they sound cocky, or they sound egotistical or prideful, or a whole host of other things that are kind of negatively associated with being overly assertive. And so it's really important that we as veterans need to reflect on how we talk, so that way we can tone it down when we want to adapt. It is important that you learn how to balance your veteran identity and your new civilian self, especially when we think the vast majority of the United States population has not served in the military. And the people that you're going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis, the vast majority of people that you're going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis, don't have that military background or experience. They probably maybe have a distant family member who's in the military, but that's not their experience and that's not their identity. And they're going to interact differently with you as a result of that. And it's not on us to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to change. I'm just going to be who I am. And it's like, all right, so do you want to deal with all the problems that come with you not adapting into society the same way that you adapted to being in the military? In the process of doing that, you need to build a broad network of civilians and veterans so you can have that civilian-veteran life balance. It's also important that you share your story. I know a lot of veterans don't want to talk about their experiences. For me personally, I had an NCO that was very about being open about your experiences. You know, you're not bragging about what you've done or anything like that, but it's important to be open and to share, because when it comes down to trauma, when it comes down through the rough stuff that you've experienced, by being open about that, you can help tackle it yourself, and you can also be a story for other people. You can be a way to bond with other people so they can see that and they can share that connection with you. It's important to find allies through all this. We're going to talk about networking. Networking sounds like a business term, but it is much more than what you would just think about it in terms of business. It is connecting with people from diverse backgrounds and professions who have unique experience, interests, and skill sets with their own extended networks that can together help you as your needs change. I think that's important for a lot of reasons. And we might not necessarily see the merit in it at the beginning, but it's something that will definitely emerge down the line, where you might think, oh, I wish I had that friendship, or oh, I wish I had that connection with that person. This is definitely one of those things, especially when we talk about developing relationships with other students, with faculty members, with work professionals, with people from a whole host of backgrounds. The friend group that I have now and the network that I have now is not the network that I had before the military, during the military, or even right after the military. And these are people who have vast different experiences and have had vast different lives than my own, but there's different intersections of which we relate a lot, or we're able to balance each other out and help each other out. And it's great to have that kind of broad network. And especially when we think about it, you know, again, in the context of the military, is you don't have one solution for everything, right? There can be multiple solutions for a lot of things. There could be some solutions that don't work for certain things, and it's great to have a broad skill set or a broad base to be able to pull from to address whatever emerges. Same thing happens with friendships and relationships and a network of people that you can connect with. Ultimately, your stability, health, and well-being largely depend on the people in your network who can support you. Some veterans may only feel comfortable associating with other veterans at first, and that's understandable. That's completely fine, and it makes sense. But you got to remember that you're a civilian now, and you have to reach out to civilians and veterans alike. This is a new community, and it's a community that you grew up in. It's not like you became a service member when you were 10. It's not like, this is the only life you've ever known. Maybe you grew up in a military family, and that might have been somewhat of the case, But at the end of the day, we came into this as civilians, and now we're back in the civilian world, and we have to adapt to it like we adapted to the military. Mentorship isn't new to us. In the military, we relied on people who were there to guide us throughout our whole career, basically. And the same applies to the civilian world, but the problem is it's not naturally occurring like it is in the military. It's a bit more of a challenge and something that has to be really intentional. We have to actively seek out. Mentors are able to help you avoid common mistakes once you return home. They can help you adapt to school or workplace culture. They can help you navigate veteran and civilian resources, and they can teach you technical knowledge and skills. They can also help you instill confidence, improve morale. They'll also have your back. So when it does come to finding a mentor, you can check if your school or workplace has a mentor program. You can check out Hire Our Heroes mentorship program as well. You can look in your network for people that you trust and respect. And later on, it's important. You should really think about paying it forward and mentoring a future veteran. When you're on your new civilian path, you need to talk about being able to make a plan. You need to be flexible. Make plans, but understand that plans change. First step right out the door when you're coming out of the military is you need to be able to secure housing short and long term. You need to be able to take care of yourself. You need to be able to take time to figure out your next step. Enroll in VA healthcare. Visit the County Veteran Service Office. Figure out if you need to file a claim for VA disability compensation, and this one's really important. That's one of the things that you should be reflecting on before you even leave the military. Enroll in community college or make a plan to attend a university if you have that opportunity. Get the most out of your GI Bill benefits and figure out the best time to apply. Apply for financial aid. Get help with unemployment claims and job searches from the EDD. Seek out networks for veterans in your city to keep you connected. Keep moving forward and learn to be comfortable with your civilian self. With all that said, thank you for your attendance. If you need more information, please find the attached modules, and we encourage you to explore other modules on the CalVet website.